Welcome to Grammar Steps Lesson 4. I hope that you've been able to find all of the pieces of grammar we've talked about while you read. So that would be subjects, verbs, adjectives, and most recently pronouns. So as you've read, you may have noticed that there are a lot of sentences that don't have those action verbs that we've been talking about. In fact, we most often use verbs that have no action at all. And those are some of the verbs we're talking about in our lesson number 4. We are talking about to be verbs, am, is, and are. So our job today is to link the subject of our sentence to an adjective that describes it using these special to be verbs, am, is, and are. I'm so excited because these are the verbs that we use most of the time in the English language. So it's really important that we know how to use them and how to find them in our reading. Am, is, and are. For today's lesson, we'll need that pronoun chart that we used in lesson number 3. I have my copy here. We will need a list of nouns, adjectives, and to be verbs in the present. That's my down arrow. Let's talk about what to be verbs are. So to be verbs are like a big equal sign between the noun and whatever it is that comes after it. So I could say grammar is fun. That means grammar equal sign fun. Grammar equals fun because that's true, but that's the job that is has in that sentence. It's just a big equal sign. There's no action. But is the verb, and it's so important. In our house, we call to be verbs always verbs. We call them always verbs because they will always be used as verbs in a sentence. So in our writing their verbs, whenever we see them in reading, we can identify that has to be the verb because they are always verbs in sentences. Let's talk some more about what these always verbs are. There are to be verbs in the past and the future, but we're talking about just the present today. So in the present, we have am, is, and are. Just 3. I love it. In the past, there's only 2. Was and were. In the future, will be. There's 1. Unless you want to be fancy, and then we have shall be also. Being and been are also forms of to be, but we're not going to use them right now, and we probably won't talk about them for a very long time. These are the main to be verbs. Once again, the always verbs. We love them so much in our house that we have a little song that I would love to share with you. So when we talk about these to be verbs, we have the present, we go like this. We have the past, and we have the future. So this is how we sing it. We go, am, is, are, was, were, will be. Am, is, are, was, were, will be. And that helps us to remember what our to be verbs are. And then, are they from the past, the present, or the future? I hope that you can sing that song and use it to find to be verbs when you read. Our job today, though, is to use those to be verbs in sentences. For that, we need another blank piece of paper, and here are the headings you can add. Subjects, we always have subjects. Verbs, a little bit lower. Adjectives. We're going to use the subjects and adjectives that we have been using in our previous lessons, and we're going to write sentences as we always do. For our first subject, I want you to think back to the pronouns from lesson 3. And when the speaker is speaking, what is the pronoun that we use? The pronoun is I. That is going to be our very first subject. So for our first subject, go ahead and write I. We're going to write you also. Remember, that's the second pronoun when we talk directly to one person. And now I want us to think of a singular person. And I'm going to write firefighter. You can write firefighter, or you can write your own singular noun. That's a person. For my next singular noun, I'm going to write a singular animal. and I'm going to choose butterfly. Now I want two plural nouns. I want a plural person and a plural animal. So you can go ahead and write yours and I'll write mine. So I wrote knights and unicorns. I have I and you, two singulars, firefighter and butterfly, and two plurals, knights and unicorn. Before we move on, we have two pronouns. I want you to change these to personal subject pronouns as we did in lesson number 3. So for firefighter, let's just assume that this is a female. So that would become she. And I'm sure you can do butterfly, knights, and unicorns on your own. Go ahead and give it a try. All right, let's check the pronouns that you wrote, and here are mine. Firefighter, we were assuming she's a female, so it became she. Butterfly, it. Knights, they. Unicorns, they. We're going to use those pronouns in our sentences just to review our grammar steps lesson number 3. Our verbs, we're only using to be verbs in the present. I can sing the song again, or can you remember what those 3 to be verbs in the present are? Stop and think. So very important. Okay, I'll start the song for you. Am, is, are. Those are our 3 to be verbs in the present. Am, is, and are. I'm writing them big and in red. That's how important they are today, are always verbs. Am, is, and are. Am is great because we only use it with the subject I. I and am, that's all we use it with. Is used with singular subjects. So I'm going to draw, or I drew right there, a singular dot just to remind us it only goes with singular subjects. Are is going to be only used for plural subjects and the subject you. Whether it's singular or plural. The subject you goes with the verb are and plural subjects, so my 3 little dots. So again, am goes with I, is for singular subjects, are is for plural subjects, and you. Those are our verbs. All right, let's think of some adjectives that we want to use to describe the subjects that we've written. So these can be, again, any adjectives that you like from previous lessons or just from your head. I'll remind you of what we went over in Grammar Steps Lesson 2. Any of these adjectives would work. I'm going to start mine out with silly. That's one we always like at our house. And I'm thinking of my subjects, and I want to use a character quality, like brave. So someone can be brave or they can have bravery. I'm going to think of one that maybe has something to do with size. I'm going to use tiny. So I have silly, brave, and tiny. I'm going to add 2 more, and I want you to add 2 more adjectives to your list as well. I hope you came up with some great adjectives. Here's the list I'll be using. Silly, brave, tiny, magical, and happy. Those are all great adjectives that describe nouns. Okay, so I'm going to stop right here, and if you happen to be in an upper grade or just ready for a new challenge, your job, is to add nouns after your adjectives. So to be verbs can connect nouns to adjectives, but they can also connect them to other nouns. For example, I could say, I am a teacher, right? That's a noun. So you can go ahead, upper grade, once again, ready for something a little bit harder. You can use your nouns, add some nouns here, to connect to the subject using a to be verb. So it would sound, instead of just being silly, it would be silly creatures or brave hero. We're going to go back to what everyone's doing. And we are going to write some sentences. We are going to choose a subject, figure out which to be verb it needs, and then add the adjective. For our first sentence, I want to talk about the firefighter. But again, we're going to use the pronoun she. And I'm going to attach it to the adjective brave. Now I have to think, do I use am, is, or are? Remember, am is only used with I, and I am not a firefighter. My choices are is and are. Firefighter is singular, I use is. So my sentence becomes, she is brave. Go ahead and write that down and make sure your sentence has those 4 things that every sentence needs. All right, so here's our sentence. She is brave. We have a capital letter. We have punctuation. We need to make sure we have a subject and a verb. What's the subject of our sentence? Underline it, mark it with an S. What's the verb in our sentence? It's an always verb. Box it, mark it with a V. There's our subject and there's our verb. We also have an adjective. Our adjective is brave. I am going to put a squiggly line under it. It's not really as important as the subject and verb, but it's fun. I'm going to squiggly line it, and I'm going to draw an arrow to what brave is describing. Brave is describing our subject. She is, that always verb, is just acting like a big equal sign. She equals brave. Let's do one more. For our next sentence, I want us to use unicorns, popular subject in my house, but we're going to use the pronoun they. And unicorns, of course, should be described as magical. Am, again, can't use it only for I. My choices are is and are. Which to be verb do I need? I hope you said are because I have a plural subject. So my sentence is, they are magical. I want you to write the sentence, underline the subject, box the verb. All right, here's our sentence. They are magical. And I hope you underlined they as our subject and that you boxed are, that always verb, as a verb. And if you went the extra step, you put a squiggly line under magical, our adjective, and drew an arrow to our pronoun that it's describing. Again, are is our great big equal sign. It's that always verb, and it's just connecting they to magical. There's no action, and that's what's so great about to be verbs. No action, but they're always verbs, so we have to know them. This is our lesson 4, grammar steps number 4. Your assignment is to write at least 2 sentences in the same pattern that we just practiced. Pronoun, a to be verb, am, is, or are, plus an adjective. And again, upper grades, you can go ahead and add a noun to that as well. Here's what we did in our house. So we have he is nervous and it is tiny. And you can see how they labeled that, underlining subjects, boxing their always verbs, and drawing an arrow from the adjective to what it describes. One more sample. Same one we wrote. They are magical and he is brave. So that's part 1 of your assignment, the writing. Part 2, as you read, find those always verbs and see what they're connecting. You cannot read pretty much a paragraph, probably not even a couple of sentences, without seeing one of those to be verbs because they're everywhere. They're the verbs we use more than any other verb. So we're going to go back to science. I think science is a great venue in which to find a lot of these grammar concepts, and I really don't have to look far. So I'm going to read, again from our light book, that very first sentence, light is important. What's the verb in that sentence? Is there an action? There's no action. We just have the always verb is. And all it's doing is connecting light to important, our subject to an adjective. Light equals important. So look for am, is, or are in sentences as you read. They're really, really tiny and easy to skip over, but they're so important. Let's do one more example. Again, from our higher level science book. Heavy things are harder to move because of inertia. One more time. Heavy things are harder to move because of inertia. Did you hear the always verb in there? It was are, and it connected our subject, heavy things, to an adjective, harder, harder to move. Heavy things equal harder to move because of inertia. So you heard the always verb are. Am is an are. Is and are everywhere. Look for them in your writing, look for them in your reading, and I'll see you for Grammar Steps lesson number 5.